you for having me. Before I begin, I joked earlier, but this is my son Brett. He's 12. He'll be 13 next month. He's an aspiring point guard. A couple of years ago, he was at the Howard basketball camp, and he kept telling me about this guy named Kyle, who was raining in jumpers from all over the place. And he was really excited to sit with me today. In fact, because he wanted to give a shout out to Kyle Foster. So Brett, will you take 10 seconds to shout out Kyle?
What's up, little man?
Nothing much. Thank you for playing with me last 2 years ago at Howard Camp.
Man, my pleasure, bro.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about me and help to explain how that might connect to you and your space in this current world. As Coach said, I am on the faculty at Howard. I've been on the faculty since 2013, but more for these purposes, I am the fourth generation of my family to be born in this city, and grew up about 10 minutes from the campus, 10, 12 minutes from the campus. I went to Wilson High School in Northwest DC, and that was a really eye-opening experience for me because that was the first time I ever went to school with people that didn't look like me. And, you know, to catch the bus across town and go to school with a whole bunch of different looking kids was an experience that turned out to be great for me. And I didn't find this out until yesterday, but one of the kids that I used to ride the bus with was Coach Blakeney's sister. And I just found this out. And I'm glad to connect with that because it just sort of ties some of this together. Coach Blakeney and my brother-in-law were at Duke together. Coach Blakeney grew up 2 blocks away from some cousins of mine on 2nd in Missouri. And so it's just a really small world. And so I'm really happy to be with you all today, in part because I just want you to know that the university needs you. You know, doesn't need you to go win the national championship, but it needs you to stand up and be great scholars and great athletes. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this later, but I was on campus at George Mason. I was a faculty member there when they went to the Final Four. And it was an amazing place to be at that time. So anyway, as Coach mentioned, I went to Hampton. I know I shouldn't say that too loudly in a group like this, but that's part of my story. I went to Hampton as a biology major, intending to be a doctor. And midway through my first semester, I realized I made a really bad choice. And that was one of the first major lessons in my life, which was to not be afraid to change. You know, so much of the success that you all are going to have in your lives are going to be about, largely going to be about finishing what you start. But you also have to do so without being too rigid, and because sometimes that can get in the way. And I'm glad I changed my major to political science because it opened up a whole different world for me that gave me the career that I now have and gives me an opportunity to be involved in our public dialogue. So as I said earlier, I'm a 4th generation Washingtonian. My family's been in this city since the 1890s. And as I think about what's going on in the world right now, I've been thinking a lot about my grandfather. My grandfather was born in 1902 here in this city. And I can remember being a young kid about his age and hearing my grandfather tell me very passionate stories about watching race riots here in DC in 1919 when he was 17 years old. And that was the first of a number of stories that over the course of my life as a kid, sort of growing up, that I would hear from my family and hear about in school that gave me a real sense of what's going on in the world and a real interest in activism. My father and his brothers and sisters attended segregated schools here in the city, one of which you can see from the campus. He went to Cardozo High School where he played football and basketball, football, ran track, and also was a champion swimmer. My eldest uncle dropped out of high school at the age of 16 to work and help the family. He got a GED and somehow passed a pilot's test to join the Army and took a train ride to Tuskegee, Alabama, where he trained to become a pilot. And he was training to be a Tuskegee Airman at the time the war ended. And he came home, and the first thing he did was enroll in Howard University. So he's the first member of my family to actually attend college. And it took him 14 years to finish. He was a civil engineering major. He had to pay his way through school because my family didn't have any money. And it took him 14 years to finish. He went on to become the first Black engineer hired by what is now Metro Bus and Metro Rail, and had a consequential role in helping to lay out the subway that we now all have access to. He's 94 years old and can't stop talking about two things: being a Tuskegee Airman and Howard University. And it's my hope that your experiences will mean so much to you that when you're 94 years old, you'll be so happy to reflect on your days at Howard and what those days meant for you. So he was the first to enroll in college, but he was the third to graduate. The second to enroll and the first to graduate was another of my uncles who earned degrees at Virginia Union and Yale. At Virginia Union, he met and befriended Martin Luther King Jr. And they were very close from that point through King's life. And my uncle was one of his chief lieutenants, if you will. And one of my favorite pictures is one of them marching down 14th and U Street right after the signing of the Voting Rights Act, not far from our campus. He went on to serve in Congress, representing DC for 20 years. He helped to launch the Free South Africa movement that ultimately led to Nelson Mandela's freedom, and has had a consequential career in life too. And the third to enroll and the second to graduate is my father, who, as I mentioned a moment ago, was an athlete. He went to Central State in Wilberforce, Ohio, where he played football and was a swimmer, and went on to a long career in federal government service. And then the last person I want to tell you about is my mom, because just a few days after she graduated high school, she got in a car with a friend of hers and drove from Burlington, North Carolina to DC without a job, but with a few phone numbers of friends, and decided to build a life here because there was nothing really going on where she was that she was interested in. She worked her way through school, ended up getting a bachelor's degree at UDC and 2 master's degrees, one of which was at the University of Maryland. I mention her in part because she worked for 25 years as a librarian and Founders Library on our campus. And I can remember in high school wanting to go over to campus and just sit there because it was a really good opportunity for me to look at girls. And that was a really big deal for me because it was my first real taste of college. And while I always wanted to go, it was clear to me that I was going to go to a school like Howard because, that's where the girls were, right? So it was a really, she and my father and all of my family have had a really big influence on me in helping to shape some of the decisions I made, which led me to Hampton, where I was, I had a little too much fun my first year, but I eventually got it together and graduated and went to Howard for graduate school. One of my enduring memories in undergrad was in summer school at Hampton, being in a dorm room with one of my friends from DC when we found out that Len Bias had died. And for those of us who are of a certain age and lived in this city and love basketball will tell you that Len Bias's death was one of the most depressing things we've ever seen for people that weren't members of our own family. And I know some of you have seen the recent ESPN replays and programs about Len Bias. And I think Coach Blakeney will back me up on this. That dude Bias was amazing, man. And we lost a lot not seeing him. One of the hardest working dudes you'll ever know. And who knows where it would have landed for him had he gone to the Celtics and been healthy and learned how to play in that system. I mean, so anyway, I left Hampton, went to Howard for graduate school, thinking I was going to have a career in district government. Ended up having a transformative experience as a research assistant for one of the faculty members, and decided I wanted to be a professor. And so I went and got a Ph.D. at Howard, and it's changed everything for me. Again, getting back to an earlier point, you know, you set goals for yourself, but you often don't ever know where those plans are going to land. Had I been rigid about my decision making, I'd probably be an unhappy doctor right now, or an unhappy person in government. But instead, I ended up picking a career that really matched what I wanted and matched my interest, and it's been a really good ride for me since. But between Howard and getting into academia, I worked on Capitol Hill, I worked in human resources, I did research for members of Congress, just a variety of different things. And so I'm in a great career and a great place and feel good about it. Now, I mentioned earlier I was at George Mason. I was there for 11 years before I got to Howard. And this is one of the things I just want to emphasize to you. There are really no dreams that are too big. I was on that campus when Mason made it to the Final Four. And for a largely commuter school, which without much of a basketball profile, when they won those first two games that opening weekend, it just shot fire through the whole campus, you know. And next thing you know, they swept the next weekend, and the next thing you know, they're in the Final Four. And it was the single most amazing, transformative college athletic experience I ever witnessed with my own eyes. And I'm just telling you that because I want you to think about this as you think about your own team. There's nothing too big. There's not a big difference between the Colonial Athletic Association and the MEAC, you know. And I'm not going to be surprised if 2, 3, 5, whoever knows when years down the line, Howard is making the same kind of noise. I want you to know that those guys that made that team, that were on that team, all of them are revered figures on that campus. They are legends. And I want that same kind of legendary status for all of you, that you can walk on a campus at any time and know that everybody knows who you are and everybody's happy to see you. That's the way it is right down 66 at George Mason right now, 14 years after they made it to the Final Four. So I'm sharing all of this in part because, you know, we are a collection of our life experiences. And for me, it all boils down to the line that's at the bottom of my university email. And that is, as we live through our lives and make our decisions, we have to come up with a set of guiding principles. And for me, those principles are to walk with dignity, to speak with intelligence, and to live with integrity. Those are the things that I try to do with my students. Those are the things I try to do when I'm on television or on radio talking about what's going on in the world and what we have right now with not just the pandemic, and police brutality and the uprisings in response to that, and all of the other things that are going on with our president and an election coming up, I think that, you know, walking with dignity, speaking with intelligence, and living with integrity are the kinds of things that sort of help me get through what is a really tough time for us all, including for you. So let me talk about those three things: dignity, intelligence, and integrity. So dignity is defined as the inherent value and worth that we all have as human beings. We all bring value and worth to something, whether it's to a team, to our job, to our family. We all have a particular value. And I just want you to know that whatever your particular value is, I want you to wear it and own it, because it's sort of the foundation that we all have as individuals. And it's the kind of thing that's necessary to earn respect and success. If you don't have dignity and sort of acceptance of your own value, it's going to be difficult to get people to respect you. Intelligence, in the sense that I'm talking about it, is information that is based in value and fact. Now, I know every single one of you knows somebody who has the answer to everything and knows everything. But they might not necessarily be speaking from a perspective of intelligence. That is to say, information and fact. They may be speaking about feelings or their own interpretation of things that aren't necessarily based in value and fact. When you limit the willingness to speak in generality and limit the willingness to speak about things that you don't quite know, and acknowledge that you don't know anything, you're going to be surprised at how much smarter you sound, because when you speak on things, you'll be speaking on things that you actually know about. I come from the world of politics, and everybody has an opinion. And most of the stuff I'm seeing on TV in terms of political opinion is not based in fact at all. And there's a whole lot of lack of intelligence that's going on out in the world that's being offered as truth. And people are basing decisions on that, which is a major problem as we go forward in trying to decide what we want to be as a country and where we want to go. And then lastly is integrity, which is the adherence to a certain set of ethical values. So here's where things get a little tricky, right? Because what I may view as ethical, you may not, and vice versa. But there are some certain ethical values that I think we can pretty much agree on. And if you live and work and exist with adherence to those values, I think you may find that your path gets a little clearer as you go forward. So all of that gives me a little perspective on what's going on in the world right now. And I want to leave you with one thing to think about, and that is where we go from here. So there have been protests. There, in the early days of the protest, there was also some looting. But at some point, people are going to go back home. The protests are going to stop. And we need to be thinking about where we go from here. So again, everything I see in the world is at some level impacted by politics. So the decision on where to invest money in education or infrastructure, bridges, roads, whether or not to spend money on prisons or scholarships and that kind of thing, all of those are inherently political decisions. And as we go forward, I want to encourage you all to think about a pivot, and that is the pivot from protest to politics. The protest piece is cool, but in a few months, there are going to be a bunch of elections. And the outcome of those elections are going to determine a lot about whether or not these protests have been successful. And as we pivot from protest to politics, we got to remember that it's the politics that sets the policies that impact the people. So whatever your own space is in the world, whatever your own interests are, if you want to change the policies that are existing, you got to change the people that are making the policies. And that's where the politics comes into play. And so whether you all are spending some time this summer helping to register voters or registering yourself if you are not already registered, or working on behalf of a campaign, whether it's something as simple as maybe making calls on behalf of your preferred candidate, or canvassing a community on behalf of your preferred candidate, please know that every little bit of political activity helps. And if you do it right and you do it well, and if you do it with dignity and intelligence and integrity, you can make a really big difference in your community, whether it's a small town election, a city council, state legislature, or something beyond. And with that, I want to stop and engage in a little conversation and take whatever questions you may have.
Hey, Mike, I'll open it up. This is Kenny
Yes.
Blake. Can you just talk to our guys briefly about the local, how the tiers of local, state, and then national elections all play a part, and some of the legislation that they can have an effect and change
Yes.
our country and our cities?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So here's one of the things I want you to remember as we get closer to the election. If you see any polling that talks about a national race, ignore that, because the American presidential election, for example, is a collection of state races. And so what you want to be paying attention to is what's going on in the individual states. But our system of government exists on a variety of different levels, local, state, and national. And there are elections that take place all the time at all of those different levels, every 2 years for the House of Representatives, every 6 years for the Senate, every 4 years for the presidency. This is a presidential election year, so there'll be presidential elections. There'll be a third of the Senate that's up for re-election. There'll be the House of Representatives. And then there are all of these other state and local races around the country. There's some governorships that are up, state legislatures, mayors, city councils, you name it. So wherever you are in the country, I would hope that you would spend just a little time just figuring out, who's my county council representative? Who's my state legislative representative? Who are these people? What are they about? Are they people I can support? Are they people that maybe I need to oppose? Because there is space for you at all levels of government, at all levels of politics. We often focus on what's going on at the national level, and that's certainly important. But, police policy, education policy, transportation policy, those are almost always set at the state and local level. And so it really does matter not just who your president is or who your senators and representatives are in Congress, but also who's, on the city council and who's on the county council, state legislature, and on and on. So all of that stuff matters. And I do think that, you have a say in that. You have a role to play in that, and I hope that you will.
I have a question.
Yes.
In regards to going to Hampton and Howard, obviously I've only been at Howard, one HBCU, but going to college at two different ones, what were some similar experiences that you thought were positive towards your career and your future?
So, so first for those of you who don't know, Hampton and Howard are very different institutions. So the College of Arts and Sciences at Howard has about 6,000 students. Well, the total Hampton University student population is about 5,000. So, you know, you add it all up, and Howard is twice as large as Hampton. But the one thing I got at Hampton that I don't know that I could have gotten anywhere else is I was in a small department with faculty members that really took a lot of time to make sure that I had all that I needed to be successful. So one of my former professors is now a member of the Virginia State Legislature. You know, and that's really cool to be able to say that, and to know that, you know, I learned a lot from her. And so the big thing I got was a community of people that were really invested in my own success. And that has carried over to me at Howard, because I really do take seriously my commitment to my students. And so when they come to me and ask me for letters of recommendation or advice, or, you know, some guidance on how to navigate certain situations, be they on campus or off campus, I feel really committed to helping them figure that out, you know, because as you all know, when you're 18 to 23, you know, you don't actually have all the answers. You have a lot of them. You're heading in the right direction in many ways, but sometimes you need some help. And so I'm happy to provide that. The other thing is I have a lifelong group of brothers and sisters from Hampton that I can count on at any time for virtually anything. And the older I get, the more thankful I am for that. You know, you all don't necessarily know this right now, but I'm just telling you, 10, 20, 30 years from now, you all are still going to be connected, not just with your teammates, but also some of your classmates. And I'm really happy for you, because that doesn't happen for student athletes at every college and university, because the culture in which they are existing doesn't really foster that, doesn't really facilitate that. But you're at a place that does, and I'm really happy for you. So a few years ago, my daughter, who's also an aspiring point guard, was at a school, and one of her classmates played football at Howard. And we ended up in a conversation, and within 10 minutes, he's showing me all these pictures of him playing at Howard. And it was amazing, because the pride that he took, and talking about all of his teammates and classmates and other people that he's still connected with, sort of made me feel good for him, because I can tell he valued it. And again, I want that for all of you, and I hope that you'll be able to take big advantage of it as you go forward, because your teammates and your classmates, I'm telling you, are going to be doing big things going forward. I am constantly connected to former students on LinkedIn, for example, and so many of them are doing great things in all these different fields of endeavor. And it's great to see them connected to each other too.
For sure, appreciate it.
When you hear stories about how your grandfather, you know, he was born, I believe you said 1902.
1902, yeah.
Yeah, 1902, and he's telling you stories about his experiences. You know, when he was 17, he experiences his first, you know, race riot and all things like that. And you look back, you know, and you look forward to where we are now. And even back when, you know, I think my first experience where I actually understood what was going on when I was 12 years old with Trayvon Martin. That was my first experience. And and how does this influence how you write certain things? Because not a lot of people would be able to, at least from what I know, not a lot of people would really understand or be able to grasp your certain viewpoint on things because they do not understand what it's like to be you or be Black in
Right.
America right now. So how do you go about writing, especially in the, you know, in politics, because it's a very, everything, especially nowadays with politics can be very touchy
Mm-hmm.
and, can rub people the wrong way, and which can, you'll be on the news 1 minute for some controversial statements you may have made. So how do you go about writing informative, but not being, I guess you have to kind of tame your emotions. Cause I know sometimes it can probably get emotional, or you can be very, I don't know the word, but may have very strong viewpoints on certain things.
So a couple of things. First, the best way to say nothing is to try to please everybody. I take very seriously this whole opportunity to be involved in a public discourse. So I have a contract with CBC Radio in Canada and a contract with CTV News in Canada. And a few days ago, I did 11 consecutive radio interviews in Canada. And what I have found, and I learned this years ago, is you got to speak your truth, whatever that may be. So I have a certain perspective that's informed by my family story. But as Coach B will tell you, my story isn't unique. You can throw a rock in certain neighborhoods in DC and, bump up against a Black person who can tell you a similar story. It's, we all have that version of our story, So I don't try to please people because you're going to be criticized for whatever you write. Now the truth is, if you go too, for lack of a better word, overboard, you might not get another chance to publish in that. So you have to sort of shape it a certain way, but you can still be strong and speak your truth, which is something that took me a while to do. And I knew I was stepping on toes the first time I got a hate email when I was at George Mason University and said something on CNN that some people didn't like, and people tracked down my email address, which was public information on the university website, and I got a flood of email. But I learned to live with that and embrace it at some level. But ultimately, you got to tell your truth. Make sure that it's backed up with intelligence. Remember, I talked earlier about truth and fact, and live with the consequences. Because the truth is, I'd rather say something that makes somebody mad and live with the consequences than say nothing and not even cause a ripple.
So who do you write to when you're writing about a certain topic? Who is your audience? Because I find it hard to see how you can have such a viewpoint and not have, almost a target audience.
Right. So it depends on the piece, and it depends on where I try to get it published. So I'm a professor, and at heart, I am really about just trying to inform people and give people something to think about. So more often than not, when I'm writing, I'm thinking about my friends, smart people who may not follow politics as closely as I do. And that was what I was thinking about in the piece that was published about 10 days ago in the New York Daily News. What would I want my friends to be thinking about as they are angry about these protests? What do I want them to be thinking about other than that? And then there's some other times when I've been just trying to be purposefully provocative and stick a finger in the eye of the people who are on the other side of my position, and to just sort of hold up a mirror to them and say, you're being ridiculous, and here's why. So the issue really does depend on, what the goal is of the piece.
Yeah, and I'm sure.
And by the way, let me just say quickly, you know, all of you have an opportunity to try this out for yourselves. There's no reason why you can't write a piece from your own perspective, let's say on shut up and dribble and all of that stuff, and sort of the intersection of sports and race and all that kind of stuff, and send it to the Hilltop. They'll publish it. You know, you all should know that there are many great sports writers in the world who started off as competitive athletes. I don't know how many of you all know the name Bill Rhoden, but Bill Rhoden was a football player at Morgan State before he went on to write for the New York Times for years and years and years. Big time dude in sports journalism. You know, some of you all know Michael Wilbon as a tennis and baseball player in high school growing up in Chicago. You know, and once your careers are over, wherever that ending is, whether it's at Howard or professionally somewhere, you know, you'll have an opportunity to stay engaged if you want. And a good way to start that, if you want to write, is to start writing and submitting to the Hilltop. You can learn how to do it. You can make your mistakes and work it out and go from there.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
For these guys, and for even someone like me who's not from DC but moved to DC, which is such a political city, is there any advice on like certain publications we should follow? Just little things, maybe on Twitter to follow, just to keep us informed. Like in econ, they say read the Wall Street Journal, something like that.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question, because there's so much news and information out there that it's like a fire hose, right? And if you try to get it all, it's just a mistake. So every day, the first website I check is called Political Wire, politicalwire.com. And it's a news aggregator that collects some of the really good sort of political and electoral news and information. So my first recommendation is that you check out Political Wire. And it's the kind of source that will point you in the direction of a number of other sources that can keep you informed. You know, I'm not expecting anybody to know a ton of stuff about everything, but your learning curve will increase tremendously in relatively short order if you just check out that website periodically. Again, it'll point you in the direction of other things that you'll find useful.
Cool, thank you.
Sure.
So being in the, so I've actually had a few conversations with some of my peers and family members about everything that's been going on. Mm-hmm. And I think you'll be a good person to ask. So my personal belief is, or something that kind of annoys me sometimes with everything we have going on, is that, yeah, we push people to vote, we push people to, as we should, and we, you know, tell people, yo, we need policies, we need to tell these politicians or whoever the case may be that the Black community needs this, that, and third, right? Whether it's reform or voting suppression or all different types of things. So as somebody who's very deep in the political, you know, you have very deep political knowledge, how important would you say it is to not only like go out and vote, but actually have people that look like us go assume those positions? Because we've been through, you know, false promises before. Like, we know how it goes, where people can say certain things to appease a certain group of people, get that vote, and then, you know, their whole term and nothing really happens. You know what I mean?
Well, so the really important piece to remember is the political contributors to our condition took a long time to take root. It's going to take a long time to uproot them. So one of the things I tell people is you got to vote, and then you got to monitor. That is to say, you got to vote to get people elected who are going to put into practice the things that you believe. And then you got to monitor those people and make sure they do what they promise to do. There's a whole lot of focus on the first piece, but not enough on the second piece. You know, it takes a long time to change public policy. And sometimes the opposition to those changes is stronger than the ability of those who want to do the right thing to actually do the right thing. Because, you know, let's take Barack Obama, for example. He gets elected in 2008. And I think a lot of people just sort of thought that all of a sudden this stuff was now on autopilot because, you know, we got a brother in the White House and he's going to work it out. But that's not how it works. You know, you need a Congress, a House, and a Senate to help push the policy through. And voters need to continue to re-elect sympathetic members to make sure that happens. So President Obama gets elected in 2008, and by 2010, the Democrats lose the House and the Senate, and a whole bunch of plans he had in mind then go out the window. So it's voting and it's monitoring. And without those two things, I don't see how you get any change. Certainly not long term, culture changing change.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Because like right now, like, you know, voting and then having active members of our community actually go and get those positions. Because like right now, I think Congress right now is like 90% white.
It's close to it. But listen, you know, look, so you all are seeing these protests all around the country, all right? I bet you every person who protests doesn't vote.
Yeah.
You know, so you know, if you're going to march in a protest, but you're not going to march into a ballot box on election day, you know, what are we talking about? So that's the big thing. Participate in any way that you can.
Yeah. And then and then to bring up another point, and that's a whole nother ball game too, because not only do not a lot of people vote in the first place, but there's voter suppression going on in a lot of different places. Like where I live in Atlanta, and you know the only reason I can go out and vote is because my county is big enough to where I can go to a nice enough area in my county and I can have actual ballots that are working and stuff like that. You go to the Black communities around here, and people are waiting like there's a mile-long line for like one ballot box that may or may not work. And you go to these white communities, and it's completely different. So I think structurally, how we vote in the first place isn't in our benefit, and that's something like you said is going to take a while to even fix,
right? Because
you know that's definitely a public policy, but you know just from the roots.
So people jumped up and down with about 60% of Black voters, Black voting eligible people turned out in 2008. That's still, to me, an embarrassingly low number. I mean, just imagine the change that could happen if the number were actually 80%. In places like Georgia and Florida, North Carolina, completely different ballgame.
Yeah.
Coach, may I ask a basketball question?
Absolutely. Michael, if you don't mind, can I just ask our guys, how many of you guys have voted?
Or are registered to vote?
Or registered to vote?
Registered.
So yeah. I have it on all of my course syllabi. I give extra credit to any student who can show me their voter registration card. I would encourage you to take it to your professors, particularly if you're in political science or history or something like that, and ask them if they could hook you up with a couple extra points on the first exam. Because I think one of the things the university needs to do a better job is sort of encouraging that kind of participation. While I don't jump up and down about who you vote for, I just want to make sure you vote.
Yeah. Right now, Michael, we have a petition going along, starting with our coaches in NCAA to make November 3rd a national kind of holiday where no one practices, and we encourage our student athletes, staff, families, and communities to go out and vote. So we're working on that right now.
That's great. Yeah, I hope that happens. Yeah. So can I ask my basketball question now?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so I got my aspiring point guard here with me, and I want to ask you a question I heard him ask Quinn Cook about a week and a half ago. And that is, given where you all are now in your basketball journeys, what would you tell your 12-year-old self?
Work harder.
Tell me a little more about that. What is it that you didn't do when you were 12 that you wish you'd done by working harder?
Just taking more effort in practicing, and not when like you do find a basketball team, don't always just go with a team because they have a name. Go somewhere where you can develop your skill, because there's a lot of people who are good at 12 who end up falling off. And then you're going to wish back then you didn't just sit on the bench for like a good like DC Premier team, but actually played on a less known team, developed your skill, because at the end, it's going to help you benefit more.
Because as you all know, there are a lot of 12-year-olds that stop growing when they get to a certain point. And while they may be nice at 12, that might not matter at 16. Anyone else got some advice for this young fellow?
I would definitely say increase or work on your mental game in terms of your mental strength, because there's a large portion of basketball is physical ability and what you can do on the court, in terms of movement and making the skill level stuff. But where a lot of people cut off is on the mental side. Fourth quarter, who's going to want it the most? When you're working out, can I keep going? Or am I going to push myself? Do I need dad or do I need mom to be right behind me telling me to, go harder? Or do I need to be reminded to work out today? I would definitely say increase. If your mental strength is peak level, then it'll take care of everything else. Because if you're strong mentally, if you're on the court, don't get in your head. If coach is getting on you, you're not going to get all hurt. You're going to take the criticism, move on to the next play. And it just helps you in all aspects, even like everyday life. So I would definitely tell my 12-year-old self to, don't be mentally weak.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that, I probably would say like develop good habits, like mentally, but I would say like in the classroom, for real, because I think that translates over to the court as well. Like I know for me, like back when I was like 12, 13 years old, I didn't take school that seriously, but as I got older, like I seen like that the harder that you work and everything that you do, if you put your full effort into everything that you do, that it kind of just becomes a habit. So it doesn't really take as much like when it's time to really go hard, like in a game or a practice situation. So yeah, I would just say like academically take that serious. I'd add too, being at 12 years old, obviously you want to like have fun, hang out with your friends, but just understanding how like sacrificing going out to like go hang out in the backyard with your friends will pay off to like, instead of doing that to like end up working out. Because when you're older and you're playing in a big game, playing somewhere that you always dreamed about playing, that feeling of doing that is way better than that little enjoyment you would have had playing with your friends back in the day.
I'd say don't ever get too comfortable. I feel like when you receive that success, when you're playing well and everything, it may get to your head a little bit, and you may want to relax a little bit, and you feel like you can, take a step back because you're doing well, but you got to keep going because nobody else is going to stop. So you keep going, you keep working, because there's always something you can get better at.
Yeah, I add probably you want to have your long-term goal, but then you also want to have like your daily goals, you know what I'm saying, to achieve every single day to get you to your long-term goal instead of just trying to get it all at once, because that's going to get you frustrated when you think things not going right. So I say definitely.
Thanks. Appreciate that. You got a question? You sure? You taking notes? All right. Thank you, fellas. I appreciate that. I'm trying to be the. So when I was coming up, I played a lot of basketball, and I played a little bit in high school. But my dad didn't know sort of how to navigate that a little bit, and so I'm trying to do that for him. He actually said out loud that he wants to play at the highest level possible. And so I'm just trying to figure out the best practices to help get him there. So so I appreciate your guidance on that, fellas. I really do.
We're very grateful and thankful to have both of you guys today.
Appreciate it.
I think it was really informative and uniquely different from other conversations that we've had. I'm just you're a Howard professor. You're one of us, and guys, Michael and the family comes to games. So he's just not a guy that you'll see walking around, in his shirt and tie, but also he's a guy that will be active and with our program. I think it's really neat to have him spend some time with us today, and like I said, we're very grateful that he did that.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Again, I'm a huge hoop dude and love to bring him to games. We caught a few games last season and have been going to games for years. And so I'm looking forward to coming to check out you guys this coming season and bringing him and his sister and all of that too.
Sure, thank you.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
Okay, so I'll catch up with you, KB.
Absolutely. Take care, guys. We'll see you guys soon. Well, thank you so much.
All right, man. Peace.
Peace.